Yeah, I think, and isn't there like in Canada or in North America in general, like s- Muslim schools that are just like predominantly Muslim and teaching that stuff to kids? Or
I don't know. I haven't been in Canada that long, but it's possible. I know that, oh, that's a whole other can of worms, by the way. In my country, the Islamic schools, we call them madrasas.
yeah,
They're,
madrasa.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
they're,
it's from I think it's from a Hebrew word,
oh, really? Oh, okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, it probably, it could be like from a middle, it's all from the
yeah.
Middle East, right? All
It's
of those
all, yeah,
languages are very,
mishmash of words,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. The languages are very similar. But yeah, so madrasas in Bangladesh, very, very controversial, but people don't like to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. c- Children get raped in madrasas like on the daily, on
What?
the daily. Yeah, 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 daily, daily, and that is what is reported. So the real number is probably much higher because people don't like to. Obviously, children don't like to tell their parents, "Oh, I got raped yesterday." No one likes to. It's hard for children to talk about. But even the reported numbers are mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. Children are getting raped in madrasas. Children are getting killed in madrasas, but but most of them are free. Most madrasas are free, so they're, yeah. So poor people like happily send their children to madrasas, and I don't blame them. They think, oh, it's free, and they're gonna get a religious education. They're gonna become good, God loving, God fearing people. But then what happens in these madrasas is like these like sexually frustrated, I don't know, closeted imams. They rape these little boys.
Oh
And
my God.
that's just what happens. And there isn't really a meaningful conversation about it. And anytime you try to bring up that there is a pattern of sexual abuse in madrasas, like conservative people, including the guy who was defending slavery, that person I had a debate with, he we had a debate about this too, and he was saying, oh, it's just the same shit that people say, like, oh, it's just a few bad apples, you can't judge the whole system by a few bad apples. But the thing is, you're not even willing to do anything about the few bad apples. Your solution is just, oh, let them be, let them rape. That's not a solution. That's just like ignorance. So no one is allowed to touch them essentially because, oh, if you touch them, it's oh, you're going after religion, you're going after religious schools. But nobody is speaking up for these children, and it's a problem.
It's I've heard that there's a term saying that if you are Muslim, you need to like trust all Muslim or stuff like that. Like you
Mhm.
cannot badmouth another Muslim. Like if a Muslim did a crime, that's one thing. But if you are accusing a Muslim of doing something, you cannot accuse
Mhm.
him without, you know. So is it true like you cannot say anything if you are just like heard something somebody say or
I
anything?
mean, I don't know what the official actual rule is in the Quran because I read the Quran a long time ago and I don't have it memorized, but like that is the prevailing culture, right? Like this is gonna be a, I don't know, not with you guys, but generally speaking, this is a controversial opinion. Is uh you know how Muslims in the West, in the US and Canada and the UK and Europe, wherever, they they like to pretend that their version of a very liberal Islam is the real version of Islam, that this is what's practiced all over. This is something that is very common in Canada, at least. Like liberal Muslims try to shut down any and all criticism of Islam by chanting Islamophobia, being like, no, look how liberal we are. Look at us. We are so liberal. I'm like, no, but the only reason you're liberal is you're in Canada. You're able to be that liberal. And like that is, yeah, they know full well how conservative, how dogmatic, how problematic the version of Islam that's practiced in the Middle East or in South Asia is. But they like to pretend, oh, that version doesn't exist, or that's just a small number of people. We are the real Muslims. Even the most Muslims, the majority of Muslims reside in the Middle East, in South Asia, in like in our side of the world, in the like underdeveloped side of the world. But where was I going with this? My train of thought is,
Saying that the people
oh,
of
the
the
culture of
Muslim
like you
can,
can't point a finger at another Muslim.
yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll ask other Westerners to look at them, look at the liberal Muslims, and be like, just accept that this is what Islam is like, but you can't criticize. Yeah, so you can't criticize the the more unpalatable,
Radical.
yeah, unpalatable. I was gonna, yeah, radical or unpalatable versions of Islam, or like that's practiced elsewhere. You can't point a finger at that. What they're doing is they're protecting those radicals, right? They're not saying they're protecting those radicals, but that is the end result. It may or may not be their intention, but that is the end result. By shutting down criticism of that sort of radical Islam, of that sort of extreme sexism, extreme misogyny, extreme homophobia, when you shut down criticism of those aspects of Islam, and you only like tell people, oh, look at us, we're these like rainbow unicorn Muslims, we are the true version of Islam. Like, you're just protecting them in the end. And I don't understand any logic in that. If I was a liberal unicorn Muslim, I I would do everything in my power to make sure that people who are following Islam in the wrong way, in the radical way, are reprimanded. That because they're like painting a bad image of my religion. I would want them to be like reprimanded as soon as possible. But that is at least not the liberal Muslims that I've seen. That's not what they do. They just try to shut down criticism of those Muslims by saying, "Oh no, look at us, unicorn Muslims. We're better.
It's
Look at
so
us. We're
funny.
this is it."
It's so funny when you're
Yeah.
saying that, but because in right now in Western society, the the exact opposite is going on with Judaism, because
Mm.
you see all those um, far left Jewish people, or even far right Jewish people, and I explain later what I mean by that. But you have very far left Jewish people who are Gentile, and so like saying, oh, what you're doing to the Palestinians and everything, and oh, I reject the idea of Zionism, and Zionism is not Judaism. Well, first of all, Zionism is not a bad word. The idea of saying Zionism is a bad word. I am a proud Zionist. I'm a left-wing Israeli, but I'm a
Mm-hmm.
proud Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of and second, the idea of separating Judaism and Zionism is ridiculous, because in the Bible we say all the time, one day in Jerusalem, like Yom Echad אנחנו נהיה בירושלים. One day we'll come back to Jerusalem. This is the whole idea of Judaism. The whole idea of Jewish in the diaspora is one day we will come to Jerusalem back. This is what we were saying for 2,000 years. So the idea of saying, oh, we are Jewish, but we have no connection to the land, that's bullshit. And right now they are being weaponized to say, those Jews in Israel, those are not real Jews. Those
Yeah.
Jews in the diaspora that believe in Israel, those are not real Jews. Real Jews denounce Israel. Real Jews are not Zionist. And we are always saying, those people who say that Zionism and Judaism isn't connected, we denounce them. They have zero understanding of what it is to be Jewish. And I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
it as an agnostic, right? I'm saying
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
as I understand the deep rooted um, connection, not to just to the land, but to the ethnicity. Like
Mm-hmm.
I see myself as an ethnistic, like a Jewish ethnicity, not
Yeah.
as a Jewish religious
Sure.
person. Yeah, and you have even they're using like I said, the far right Jews,
Yeah.
like the Netway Karta, which are Hasidic Jews, usually with broken teeth, usually with because they are so anti-Semitic, those Hasidic Jews. They hate Israel so much. And the idea of why they hate Israel is completely different from the left-leaning Jews, but they're
Mm-hmm.
having the same, they're using the same
Yeah.
groups, two groups to denounce Israel. Those
Yeah.
Hasidic Jews are saying, by their own belief, is that unless all Jews will become Hasidic Jews like them, like extreme, cult like them, then only then we can come to Israel. As
Yeah.
long as we're not like them, we have no right
Got
from
it. Okay.
God. So this is their twisted mind, and
Yeah.
they are actually, we've seen them multiple times every year going to the Holocaust denial convention in Iran.
Wow.
Yeah, and those are the people who are being
No,
weaponized.
there are Jewish Holocaust deniers. That's a thing.
Well, the extreme right wing Hasidic, really, really, really weird group that is called
I had
Karta.
no idea this was a thing.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
You also had Jews in the Holocaust itself, in World War II, that were that they thought that they can make a deal with the Nazis
Mm.
to save Jews. They thought, I don't really want to get into all of this, but there's a
No,
very,
no, yeah.
very famous story about two Jewish guys who escaped Auschwitz in 1943 by the skin of their teeth, right? That really close call. And they came to Budapest. No, wait, they came to Hungary. Sorry, they came to Hungary and they had written 40 pages of horrible accounts of what's going on there to tell the Jewish community to be aware and to run
Mhm.
away. The Jewish community received those pages and did nothing. And
Mhm.
it's later been discovered that the head of the Jewish community thought that he can make a deal with the Nazis to give them all of the Jewish property, gold, and money to
Mhm.
save the lives of the Jews. And after he gave them all that, they took all the Jews. He saved himself and his family and a thousand other Jews only by, by making a deal with Nazis. So
Mhm.
we are not a monolith. We are not a one, people like to say this is a Jew, this is, a white colonizer, which I every time I
Oh
hear,
yeah, I was gonna say that. Like, you don't look white to me.
right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I'm part Egyptian, part Iranian, part
exactly. Yeah.
Turkish, not Turkish,
And
part
that's very
Italian.
common in Israel, like to be a mishmash of like different Arab like ancestries. It's
Yeah,
common, right?
exactly. We are
Yeah,
such a big mishmash, and
yeah.
even that, even that's funny because we always had those kind of conversation inside of Israel, saying, "Oh, you're Ashkenazi, or you're Sephardic, you're brown, you're white," and even us, like the young generation, said, guys, that most of us are just, brownish. Just accept that you're brownish. Nobody's Ashkenazi. Nobody is Sephardic. No, it's so ridiculous. And even if, so what the fuck? So what? So what?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and I really enjoy the idea of people think that Israel is like uh only Ashkenazi Jews living, like, counting their money and stuff like that. Just today, I went with my daughter to a gym, like a playground,
Mhm.
and I've heard people talk French, like next to me, Jews. I've seen a Muslim woman covered with all of herself,
Mhm.
playing with one of her daughters that has, I think, Down syndrome. I'm not sure, but she's got like a problem. And I'm seeing her playing here with us. And and another one outside was speaking Russian. So this whole idea of people who are speaking on one language or only one culture, one white colonizer, it's so funny to me. I'm
Mhm.
really I'm it's so ridiculous. I'm trying to explain to people. I'm saying, and it sounds so racist when I'm saying it because, like, that my doctor is Muslim, so I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like,
Yeah. You know what it is as someone who now lives in the West, who lived all her life in the global South, but now lives in the West, what I've realized is people some people, they come to the West and they become everything that we hate the West for. Like when we're in our developing nations or in the Middle East or wherever, we talk about, oh, the West like dominates the international media narrative, like whatever they say goes, whatever the West says goes. And that is generally true. But now, even people who come to the West become like Westerners, like these, like the people that we're describing, like the Western extreme left Jewish people or the extreme right Jewish people or the liberal Muslims in the West. They come here and then they participate in that like that like overhauling of the media of like, oh, our narrative is the right narrative, and me as a Western residing liberal leftist Muslim, all other Muslims are like me. Or as like a non-Zionist Jew, all other Jews are like me. This is the real Judaism, or this is the real Islam. They come here and then they act like their voice is the only one that matters, even though when they were in our home countries, at least my friends who were when they were in Bangladesh, they were complaining about, oh, the West dominates the narrative. But then they come to the West and they start dominating the narrative. They start speaking over like other brown people who live in those brown countries. They start speaking over them. And that is such a fascinating phenomenon to me. And which is why I think that gratefully, I fit in pretty well in my life in Canada. I have really good friends. I have a good job. I have people around me who love me and I love them and I'm very happy. But in the bigger, larger scheme of things, I think I do struggle to fit in there because I struggle to be that kind of hypocrite, to come to the West and forget what my roots are and just dominate the narrative about, oh, like everybody is like me. Like I'm telling you right now, I started this conversation by telling you my family was a pretty liberal, progressive family, but that is not the case for most of Bangladesh because it just isn't. But I know people who come here and then they act like, oh yeah, like women's rights is not an issue in Bangladesh. I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you? They really, I'm not kidding. Like they come here and they're like, oh yeah, they blame Muslim majority countries for being sexist, but there is no sexism in my country. I'm like, there is absolutely sexism in our country. What the fuck are you talking about? Am I mad at those white people? Absolutely. They suck. But you know where they're getting that information, right? They're getting that information from like immigrants in Canada, like people like me who came here and then they started lying. Then they started lying to these white people about what a feminist utopia Bangladesh is or what a feminist utopia Pakistan is. That is not true. And I'm not saying I'm exaggerating. They're not claiming Bangladesh is a feminist utopia, but they come here and then they act like, oh yeah, the West has so many problems. Like my country treated women better, or don't blame like Islam for misogyny. Like there is no misogyny in my country. That is the tone that they use. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but that is the tone that they use. And then it works with white people because they've never been to Bangladesh. They've never been to Israel. They've never been to our side of the world. So they're like, oh yeah, they came here and then they're saying these things and that must be true. And you ask me what the rationale is. I think the rationale is they're literally just being selfish. Because me, when I'm fighting for, let's say, women's rights as an example, I'm fighting for first and foremost, yes, all women, absolutely all women, but my priority is poor Bangladeshi women, like low income Bangladeshi women, because that is what I was taught to believe in. That is what I was taught to prioritize from childhood by my very progressive parents. Like you prioritize the weakest of the bunch first.
Sure.
But what some people do is they come to a Western nation and then they prioritize, and their feminism evolves to prioritize themselves. Like if they're a Muslim hijabi woman coming to Canada, their feminism starts to prioritize Muslim hijabi women in the West first. And I'm not saying Muslim hijabi women in the West are not discriminated against. They are. Some of them definitely are. But that is not going to be my priority just because I'm suddenly in Canada. My priority is and continues to be the poor women of Bangladesh. But what I'm saying is people who do this, the people who change the narrative and become hypocrites the moment they come to Canada, what they're doing is like self-preservation. And I understand that instinct to some extent too. I understand the instinct to protect yourself, to like save yourself first. But in doing so, like kicking down the women that you left behind, kicking down the people that you're leaving behind in your country. I just can't make peace with that decision. Like I don't understand that decision. I think that is where it comes from, like a self-preservation instinct.
That's interesting, saying that it's a self-preservation instinct. Non-Western people come to the West and start changing narratives. Colonialism isn't its highest. And it's true. Yeah, non-Western people come to the West and starts changing the narrative. And this is also something that I found out. And like people are saying that majority, again, not all, but a lot of Muslim communities are not trying to assimilate in Western societies, in Britain, in France, in Europe, in America. They're trying to have their own community and their own laws and their own culture. And to some extent, I understand that, because you're an
Mhm,
immigrant, you're coming from a different country. And I think that every kind of immigrant does that to an extent. Like,
mhm,
if you're seeing Chinatown, if you're seeing Italian quarters in New York, it's all about the food, it's all about the culture. But something about Muslim communities feels different, feels like they're trying to say, you will not change us. We will not be changed. We came
mhm.
from a specific ideology, and this ideology is what drives us. Do you think I'm on point about that?
You're right about that. And like I'm like you, like I understand where it comes from, and to some extent I understand the impulse too. And I do it too. Like I still primarily when I'm cooking, I eat Bangladeshi food. That's a very small, non-harmful example. It's a very harmless example, but I'm holding on to my culture because that's the kind of food I like. I don't
Oh,
like white
sure, of
people food.
course.
I'm sorry. I don't like white people food. I understand the impulse to hold on to your culture, to hold on onto your traditions, but in my experience, these are the same people who will argue the opposite about like tourists in the Middle East. Like when, let's say, someone complains about, oh, why do tourists in the Middle East have to wear the head covering? It's so weird. They'll be like, oh, no, it's their culture. You should respect their culture and like assimilate with them. If you're a tourist, you should respect the culture of the person, the place you're going to. And I kind of understand both arguments, but you have to find a balance between holding on to your identity and like respecting the laws of the country you're in currently, you're residing in or living in or visiting. Where it goes wrong is like you said, like communities being like, oh, we're not gonna listen to UK's laws, or we're not gonna listen to this country's law, we're gonna make our own. That's not how things work. That's
Oh
not
yeah,
how
sure.
anything
It's
works.
it's I've been to Japan twice, and I think this is one of the best examples of a non-religious country. It's a very
Mhm,
spiritual country, but a non-religious country that is very strict about rules.
mhm,
And it's not like they were going to kill you for doing something wrong, but it's frowned upon. They don't like it. So for the sake of being a nice tourist, you will follow the rules and you would do
mhm,
stuff that, you're trying to. If you see like there's a line that you need to not cross, or like a specific way of how you manage things, or even waiting in line, like it's Israelis, we hate waiting in line, but you would be silent. You would just, you would stand for 30 minutes to get a ticket,
mhm,
for the bus or for the train, and you would shut
mhm.
up, and you would do it.
Yeah,
And I think that's the idea of respect is one thing, and fear is another. Because people, I think, uh, even in the Muslim communities, they fear the idea of stepping out, of saying something wrong.
definitely.
And this scares me. People who are so afraid from themselves, from their
Mm-hmm.
own people, from their own surroundings, how can you move forward? How can you accept to be an own person, an own identity?
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're squashed in that kind of, like you said before, like everybody's in a box, everybody's is
Mm-hmm.
placed in a box. This is what a Muslim looks like. This is what I feel. It's very you said you're from a very liberal family, but I imagine that there's a strike difference between living in Bangladesh and living in Canada outside of
Mm-hmm,
your
very
home.
much, definitely, definitely. And even my family, I say liberal by like Bangladeshi standards. They would be, I don't know if they would be considered as liberal in Canada, but they were pretty liberal parents, and but I still had to. There were restrictions on my clothing from my parents a little bit, more so from like outsiders. One time I was gonna go give an exam. I was outside the exam hall. It was an external venue. That's not important. It was not at my school, is what I'm saying. There
Mm-hmm.
was some issue. It was at a different venue, that exam. And it was during a heat wave in Bangladesh. So the temperature was like 38 degrees Celsius or something. So
Oof.
very hot day. And but those exam halls, they crank up the AC, so it gets very cold in the exam hall. So I was wearing like a sleeveless shalwar kameez, which is like a long dress with a pant underneath. And yes, I was wearing a sleeveless thing, but I was carrying like a shawl on my arm because I knew it would be cold inside. This woman comes up to me, the mother of a friend, comes up to me, takes my shawl, wraps it around me, being like, "You're dressed so immodestly. You're a Muslim dressed like a Muslim." Can you the audacity to go up to another person's a child, go up to another
Amazing.
child and wrap a piece of cloth around them? I was dumbfounded. What? What just happened to me right now? So yeah, that's the kind of shit that can happen even with me, who grew up in a liberal bubble, more or less. I grew up in a liberal bubble pretty much because of my upbringing, the private schools, and my liberal parents, and like my middle class, upper middle class upbringing. That bullshit still happened to me. So can you imagine what happens to like low income Muslim Bangladeshi women? If this is what happens to someone like me, like I want you to imagine what happens to someone who does not enjoy the privileges that I enjoyed.
And how do you think that really is for a non-privileged
Oh, I don't
Bangladeshi
have to
woman?
think. It's not very well documented, but it is pretty well documented. There's a documentary. It's free on YouTube by I believe that outlet is German.
I
They
think
have a
so.
documentary on YouTube about how in like remote parts of Bangladesh, remote rural areas of Bangladesh, what happens to women who are raped. And in that documentary, they interview like the area's chief of police. They interviewed like the most influential imam, like religious leader in the area, and they interview a bunch of other people. And the chief of police in the area, the imam, pretty much everyone they talk to gives them the same answers, like, "Oh, it's the woman's fault. They're not covering up well." And they're like, by the way, let me just paint you a picture of women in rural Bangladesh. They're always covered up well. They're always covered up well. You pretty much cannot be more covered up, but they will still blame the woman for it. And then the women who get raped, they kind of get like shunned from society because they're impure now. They're untouchable, they're impure, something is wrong with them. And then there are people who will literally legitimately argue, "Oh, you should get that woman married to the rapist. You
I've
should
heard
get that
that.
woman."
I've heard
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
that's a
that
thing. That's a very common thing, that you should get that woman or girl, little girl, whoever it is, you should get that girl married to the rapist because the rapist has already had sex with her. No one else will want to have sex with her. So she's like used up. She's used up. She's dirty. She's impure. The only person who will marry her is the rapist. So that's what you should do. Oh my God, that is the case. That is the scenario for poor Bangladeshi women. And then people who come to the West have the audacity to say things like, "Oh, the West villainizes Islam for no reason." I'm like, no. Like, are you really gonna deny the experiences of the women you left behind, the women who were your sisters, the women you left behind? You're gonna deny their experiences just because you're in the West now and it's convenient for you, really?